So just as a brief background on agriculture in Zambia, probably many of you know this already, but there's degraded soils and low input, low yield characterizes a very common scenario in Zambia. 1 to 2 hectares for maize, as an example. Maize is a very important crop, especially in the agricultural ecological zones that we're working on in the south and southeast of the country, where rainfall is very low. In some of these agroecological zones, it's around 700 millimeters per year, and then it goes up to approximately 1,000 also in some places. So it's a semi-arid to arid region. According to the FAO, 29% of land is agriculture in Zambia, but only 7% of that is arable. So we're looking at fairly restricted, good quality lands. Also, according to the FAO, 67% of maize producers, and that's about 1 million plus households, and probably much greater than half of the population of Zambia, farm on about a little bit over 1 hectare, and they produce no surplus yield, so it's very much subsistence farming in these areas. We also see generally an increase in the population in the rural areas. Rural households over 2000 to 2010 increased by 45%, so it's a pretty large change in that time. Also, agriculture is obviously a very key driver of very high deforestation rates that we're seeing in Zambia. It's one of the major problems there is the increased pressure on natural resources in general. So the question is, what are some of our options to improve these statistics? Conservation agriculture, there's a number of actors in this field in Zambia that have been working for some time. Conservation Farming Unit, established in 1996, whose primary focus is on tillage and good agronomy. They are really a leader in developing best practice conservation agricultural techniques that are appropriate for Zambia. Community Markets for Conservation, established about 9 years ago or so. Their focus is on protecting wildlife and biodiversity through diversifying livelihoods, creating markets, and conservation as well. And then, of course, there's the government, the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, who do some work on conservation agriculture too. As I'm sure many of you have found, there's a number of barriers to adoption. Some of the ones that we've noticed is the way that conservation agriculture is often promoted. I think there's fairly weak marketing on the immediate benefit, resulting in particular from good agronomy. For example, every day that you delay your planting after the first rains in Zambia, you lose 1.5% of your yield. So if you delay for a week or two while you're preparing your fields after the rains come because the soils are softer, that can result in a 20% decrease in the overall yields just for a sort of relatively small amount of time, it would seem. And the flip side of this is, of course, longer time horizon of investments for some of the practices in terms of soil fertility changes, etc. And then normal constraints on land and labor. And then there's the positive externalities, climate mitigation aspects to this, and incentives are needed, and that's part of what we'll be talking about a little bit later on. And then there's policy environments, which are somewhat distortionary as well. They distort incentives and crowd out investment. For example, the fertilizers subsidies through the Farmer Import Support Program and the Food Reserve Agency, which buys maize at very high prices and crowds out private sector investment in these markets. So just to give you a quick overview of the Trees on Farms program. The program objectives to increase agricultural productivity, increase climate resilience of smallholder farmers, and of course climate change mitigation. And we're looking to access emission reduction credits in order to improve the sustainability of the project. The farming systems, which we talked a little bit about already, small scale, subsistence and outgrower agriculture, and mixed cropping systems. The key activities of the program are tree planting to enhance conservation agriculture, and there's obviously a focus on trees that are most beneficial for the crops, and that's obviously in many cases legumes, which are nitrogen fixing, as these two species are. The project developer is the company that I work for, Shared Value Africa. We're partnering with Donavant Zambia and others. Donavant's a cotton company in Zambia, the largest cotton company in Zambia, and we're hoping to reach a scale of 80,000 farming households by 2015 and probably around 7,000 by the end of 2012. So What we're looking to do essentially is enhance conservation agriculture with intercropped legume trees, and that's really what the program is about. Conservation agriculture improves soil organic carbon by impacting major factors influencing it, increases the quantities of organic materials, preservation of soil aggregates due to the reduced tillage, and also erosion control from crop residue retention in cover crops. Legume trees, when added to conservation agriculture, greatly increase numbers 1 and 3 in that list, and it really enhance the mitigation potential of these practices. It also has an effect on 2 as well, but really the biomass and nutrient cycling is very important. Mitigation obviously is also related to the soil type, proportion of clay versus silt versus sand, and many other factors. And this brings to mind, with varying characteristics of different soil types in any area, and limited resources of a program, what the focus should be. And there's a little bit of a potential tension between looking at areas that are particularly degraded or low fertility, like sandy soils. Should the focus be on sandy soils, sort of help them out as much as possible, or should you maximize mitigation by focusing on sort of high productivity areas where there's the greatest potential for mitigation activities through the greater capacity of the soil to hold carbon and other nutrients if there's higher clay and silt proportions. So our approach with the 2 species is that they can be done in parallel on separate plots, but also a very nice method is to sequence. Diversity is a relatively fast-growing species, so it's a fairly quick and short-term immediate benefits, whereas Faderbia is quite a large tree, and it takes a relatively long time for the benefits to really accrue, and that's in the range of 7 to 10 years before you see massive turnover in biological matter and nutrient cycling that has an impact on yields and soil fertility. Faderbia, you may not know, is a kind of an interesting tree in that it's reverse phenology, and so therefore very well suited to interplanting. Reverse phenology is actually where the tree loses its leaves at the start of the growing season in the rains, so it's completely defoliated and dormant in that period. And then back in the dry season, again, it starts to grow again and produce flowers and pods and etc. So there's actually a lot of other co-benefits of this tree. For example, pods for livestock, pretty high production of pods, and flowers for honey in times of relative scarcity in the dry season. Nutrient cycling from deep soil horizons and high biomass production, though there is some mixed evidence on the impacts on yield depending on locations. Most of the evidence is widespread across Africa of yield increases and up to even as much as 240 to 400%. Diversity is also kind of interesting in that it can be easily copieced. It's fast growing and it grows back after chopping. Copiecing is to chop it down above ground, all of the woody biomass, and then it grows back again, and you can include some of that biomass back into the soils. But you can also use some of the woody biomass for other purposes as well. For example, household energy needs, or in urban market, replacing the use of charcoal, which has flow-on benefits to deforestation. General environmental benefits of including trees in conservation agriculture, I mean, it's sort of an enhancement of what's already present in conservation agriculture, and that's climate mitigation, soil health and fertility, erosion protection, soil structure, water infiltration. There's a whole range of different benefits associated with the use of trees in conservation agriculture. And then, of course, the really important ones are food security of the farmer and resilience of their cropping practices to weather shocks. So it's important when thinking about these types of projects that you need to get the priorities right. We talk about climate mitigation and all the co-benefits, but really what it comes down to at the end of the day is, in terms of adoption, in terms of outcomes, we want to make sure that the farmer is really benefiting from these things. So it's important, of course, to use technologies and practices that are really well tailored to the local conditions, but it's also important to evaluate the particular outcomes. Now, we've put together a sort of illustrative comparison of the different sort of average type of farmer using different practices in Zambia. And we won't go through all of the details here, but essentially if you look to the bottom in the orange, yellow, and green box, it's the comparison of the gross margin, depending on which market they sell in, of a farmer that doesn't use any fertilizer, a farmer that does use some fertilizer in the middle, and an illustrative farmer with a full coverage of mature Faderbia trees on their crops. And as you can see, there's a difference of several $100s between those 3 options. Evidence in Zambia of conservation agriculture with Clayderbia suggests yield increases or yields possible of around 5 tons per hectare for maize, and that's from the conservation farming unit as well. On this slide, a similar comparison that the World Bank did based on its Kenya agricultural carbon project, and they're looking here at conservation agriculture applied to a range of different farmers. Some of these farmers are using a low amounts of inputs, some are using higher external inputs, and others are using agroforestry. And as you can see, again, there's a difference in the outcomes in terms of net revenues. I'd like to move on just quickly to some of the monitoring and evaluation that we've put in place. And it's really important to use this as a learning laboratory when you're doing this data collection, and I think it's really a key way of improving program performance. We have started using mobile phone-based surveys, which means that you can get the data in real time, which is a very nice benefit of that approach. Also, there's an integrated GPS in the phones that we're using, so you can directly get plot georeferencing. For example, here on the right, you can see the outline of a plot of somebody about to plant trees. There's actually a web interface that you can use on some of these, depending on which software or servers you choose. There's actually a web interface where you can see any of the information that you've collected. We have a photo of the farmer, and we have various details about this. And these types of technologies are very cost-effective and user-friendly. The mobile phone is a fairly key resource for people in these rural areas, and they're very familiar with using them. So it's pretty straightforward to train people on this. Again, on this issue of learning as much as you can about your practices and about your approaches from the data that you come in, you want to use adaptive management in addressing the challenges that you're facing. So because the data is arriving in real time, you can really reduce lead times and incorporate that in planning much more quickly. We have some data coming in, even though the survey is underway, real time. Some preliminary results are that about 50% of farmers who joined the training session ended up planting trees. And then there's some evidence of adoption by those who might benefit most from some of these practices. For example, on the left, you can see that on sandy soils, about 63 trees were planted by farmers on average, whereas on clay soils, 26 trees were planted. The survival rates, 14, 26, and 33, are approximately the same between the different soil types. On the right, similar kind of story. On those people who declared their soils to be of poor quality, many fewer of them said that they burned their crop residues. And this is self-reported, so there's probably other things going on here. But it's clear that people who feel like they really need to do something for their soils because they're on poor soils started adopting these practices. Results coming in from the field. On the right, you can see biggest challenges in tree planting, that pie chart. One of the major challenges that people reported, the farmers reported in the program this year, was managing nurseries. We actually, instead of having centralized nurseries, we asked the farmer to build and manage their own nursery, plant the seeds, water the seeds, before transplanting to the field. That's one of the recommended practices for planting these trees. And so the question is, how do you use this information? Obviously, you can refocus training, so you go through the management practices more carefully, or you think up solutions and change the training to address the problems that they're facing. But you also want to use the data to really evaluate what's happening. Is there a causal impact on outcomes from the challenges that people are facing? For example, watering during the dry season, we have 24% of people participating said that was an issue for them. Now, how sensitive are outcomes, tree survival, to the watering that's done in the dry season? Do the people who water actually have better outcomes or not? I mean, maybe that's something that you can remove from your training practice recommendations. So you're tailoring your program to what's actually happening in the field. You might also want to consider, as we are, alternative models. So, for example, centralized nurseries instead of individual nurseries at each farmer's house or field. Also, as you can see, there's another chart here on the left. This represents a different survey that we did a couple of years ago. For those people who responded that they actually practiced these various conservation agricultural techniques, intercropping, improved fallow, potholing, planting basins, we asked them, where did you hear about this, or where did you learn about this technology? And the The black bar on the right is actually neighbors and other farmers. So the importance of technology adoption spillovers is really key here. The real impact is through these spillovers.